Well, thank you everybody for being here. It's my honor to be able to moderate this section. Um, it's very nice to meet you all also. I'm going to do my best with myself and our panel here to help you understand and navigate the pathway to licensing and compliance. And we were hoping to have taxes as part. Oh, James, welcome. Okay. Well, we're glad to have you. So, with that being said, I think one of the I'll put it out to the audience. How many of you out there currently have a license in the state of California? It's a little difficult for me to see. You, so I'd say with just a handful have licensing done. 5%. Yeah. Okay. So one of the challenges that we do have in California is, and these numbers are projections or estimates, but I recall hearing at one time there were 60,000 businesses in the state of California that were operating in the cannabis space, and only 10% had licenses, and were able to actively be considered a current legal cannabis business. So the California laws obviously are creating a bottleneck right now within our space and each of the platforms. And I can tell you from personal experience, in our licensing processes, we get a lot of individuals and groups come in and they're not sure how to navigate from dealing with the city and state, because it's a two-tier system. You'll have to deal with getting the city license first, or the county license first. And those could be very challenging experiences, dealing with, in some cases, meritorious type of applications, to other types where it's just submitting to the city. You have caps in terms of how many licenses are available in each platform. And some other very significant issues have been coming and trending in the last, let's say, 3 to 4 months, where many cities have learned from others. Where I recall seeing a 700-page document at one time being submitted, to now cities saying, we don't want to see that anymore, and have really streamlined it to where it's a very efficient type of application and submittal, to where they're very specific as to what they want from those who are going to be submitting to be very much involved in a current licensing situation. Individuals very, I put as a proponent of community-based activities, social equity programs, and so forth. So we've seen a lot of changes over the last 12 months in how cities are growing in their application review by seeing what other cities have done. So I'm going to think that right now, in the panel, you can correct me, but I believe that there's about 20% of the cities currently, of the 480 or so in the state of California, are actually green and are offering licenses. And as we speak today, there's very few offering them today, for example. So we're going to see at some point a fairly significant rush to market in the state of California with respect to what cities will be allowing licensing. So with that being said, I would like to start maybe with you, Julie, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about your experience with licensing or compliance, and how you see it coming about here in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, I had a very interesting journey into the cannabis space, because I always say I'm an artist. It's something Chris and I have in common. I came from art school. I got a PhD in philosophy. I was in a band. I'm still in a band. And I was recruited to help launch a cannabis company. I used to be a marketing director in another fringe industry, and I was recruited to come launch this vaporizer brand. And this was in early 2015. And as being what I call the cannabis civilian, which is, I lived in LA for a long time, and there's dispensaries everywhere. I wasn't really politically engaged at all, so I was like, this has been legal forever. And then the first week of working at my new company, I had a meeting with our compliance attorney and realized that I had just been put in charge of an illegal extraction lab in the middle of Los Angeles. It was like, oh, come again? And so I promptly made myself their chief compliance officer, and kind of guided that company through a journey of how to navigate this system. So that really was my experience. Was this is pre-Prop 64. This is all, I've been writing all of it kind of through that perspective of a company, and then after doing that for 3 years, I was recruited by the compliance attorney. I now work at a company called MMLG, and get to help a lot of different kind of companies and license types navigate this process. And then, and one of the other first things I did after discovering I was running an illegal lab was I joined CCIA, which is the state's trade organization, and got highly involved. They all made fun of me because I sat on every committee. And then after a year, I got elected to the board of directors, and that also gave me the ability to really participate. It's how I met Chris, and have enormous insight into kind of the struggles across the spectrum of the industry. And as you said, Gasper, the dual licensing system is one of the biggest challenges that everyone has, is how do you get past go, with the licensing scenarios. And you have, from a compliance perspective, it also turns into a huge problem, because you have the state regulations that, exist up here in the state, and then every single municipality is writing its own local ordinance that has to at least meet the state standards, but in many cases can exceed the state standards. So in terms of how I keep imagining we need to have like a new Thompson's guide, like the old driving guides for people, but it's going to be compliance regulations, municipality by municipality. Because say you're a delivery driver and you're driving from this city, and then you enter Bellflower, where it's actually in their regulations that you can't carry over $200 in cash as a delivery driver. So there's all these like really idiosyncratic little ones on the local levels that can be very disparate, not just between the locality and the state, but between locality to locality, which in California we have over 500 municipalities, and each of them are developing their own ordinances. And like he said, like a very low percentage of them actually have active ordinances. And it's going to be a challenging year of how to negotiate that stuff, because it's not over by any means. A lot of people keep saying, oh, 2019 is going to be the year of stability. Now we have these regulations. And it's like, no, you're going to see an unprecedented amount of bills being entered in at the legislative level. There's already a challenge coming to the, you can deliver everywhere provision. It's going to continue to be a challenge. And that's why, both from, I keep saying it takes not only a village but an army in terms of what your compliance team, your legal team, your everything team, because we're coming out of this period where it started with cannabis businesses saying like, man, we just want to be treated like any other business, and it's like right now you're being treated like every other business all at once, like they inherited all of the regulations of everything, and it is really challenging for operators.
And the fact that you have to renew your license every year is going to make it very challenging too. Just when you think you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, they're going to go and have to check up to make sure you're doing it right again. So with you, Chris, you're in the manufacturing space. Could you give us a little bit of your feelings on this?
I've had some interesting experiences going after licensing. The first license we went after was in a city here in Los Angeles, and the last question on the application was, would you be willing to voluntarily donate $40,000 to our police department every year? Something tells me if we didn't check that box, our application would somehow find its way into the shredder. This is the kind of stuff we dealt with at that time. And then, moving forward as a small bootstrapped company, we couldn't afford to buy the real estate. We couldn't afford to go through the licensing process. Applying can be very expensive. And, there's a number of other factors that go into that, made it really difficult for us. So we, like many other brands, co-manufactured. In the case of many other legacy brands that have been around for a long time, maybe their municipality did not have any access to cannabis. As you'd mentioned, 20%, 30% allow cannabis activity, the others don't. So, they would depend on co-manufacturers. Well, the new regulations, there was a section called 5032 that really basically prevented that in the cannabis industry. Something that since the Industrial Revolution has been a way to bring innovative products to market was now not allowed in an industry where access to even the licensing is already restricted. So, There's some workarounds. In our case, we became a financial interest holder in our licensed partner in San Diego, and we consider this sort of a stepping stone to owning our own license. But by becoming such, because of the definitions of ownership in the cannabis regulations, we're able to move forward and continue operating right now. Now it's at a higher cost, and of course, without your own license in your company name, there's challenges like try getting workers' comp insurance if your name's not on a manufacturing license. It's very difficult. So the licensing thing, it goes beyond just a piece of paper that says you can manufacture this. It goes to the point where a lot of business services, which we already have trouble with because of banking, a lot of business services that we need are very hard to attain, and if you can't attain them, they're very expensive.
Thank you, Chris. I know, James, we haven't had a chance to introduce you, so if you would like to tell the group a little bit about you. And
Sure, thank you. I'm just a boring tax lawyer. I joined Greenspan and Martyr in October. My background is that I've been in private practice. I've also worked at banks doing tax stuff. I've also been with the Department of Justice. Let me say that my point of view is a little bit different. This is my first Arcview, and the first panel yesterday was great. It said, in essence, that the vast majority of cannabis activity in California occurs in the black market. And to me, the reason why that is both because of the crippling tax burden imposed by 280E and because of all the compliance. So that's point one. Point two, I think a lot of people in my job don't think that 280E is long for this world, right? 280E is a bar to the profitable operation of Altria in the U.S. So I just don't think it'll be around. I don't think it'll be around by the end of 2020, and some people think it won't be around by the end of 2019. So when 280E goes and big companies can operate profitably in the U.S., they will come in and things will change a lot. And big multinationals like Altria love compliance. They love a big, expensive compliance burden because they can internalize it. And they use it as a weapon to get rid of smaller, medium-sized people. And that, I think, is what's going to happen over the next few years.
I think if you're not familiar with 280E, and I know James certainly can elaborate more, what we do know is that cannabis is a Schedule I drug with respect to the federal government, which includes heroin, meth, and that being the case, you're not allowed to deduct certain expenses on your tax return at a federal level. Fortunately, the state of California does allow you to deduct certain expenses. And so with that being said, your effective tax rate, when you think it's maybe 40%, could be as high as 80% or more, and certainly we couldn't conduct business profitably with that scenario being in place. I'm going to throw it back to you, Julie. In terms of one of the biggest challenges we see currently in cannabis is something called track and trace. In the state of California, the software or the metric system has been appointed to be used, and we see, and many of our clients having real issues dealing with the track and trace system right now. What's been your experience?
I feel like what is it, like Chicken Little when it's saying the sky is falling, that I say track and trace is coming to operators. I mean, one of the things, I actually just did a little PSA on this, that in the Business and Professions Code, it states that operators can incur a penalty of up to $30,000 per infraction for failure to keep or provide records. So kind of what I walk through in this thing is that, in effect, a small business, if you forget a shipping manifest with an order, that triggers about 6 other infractions that you could be facing fees of hundreds of thousands of dollars for not having a piece of paper. And this is kind of the prerequisite practice, because there's a lot of what is happening operationally in businesses right now, that when they get the call that says, hey, welcome to your provisional license, you have 30 days to onboard onto track and trace, will some people call it the next extinction event for certain companies to be like, because of the regulatory burden, because of the complexities I loved listening to the last panel and all these brilliant marketing ideas that from a compliance perspective, you're like, yeah, you can't do that. You can't send 2,000 free pre-rolls to anybody in California. That's crazy. You can't do it. There's so many limitations that you have to have creative solutions to as a business of how are you going to make money? How are you going to build your brand? How are you going to do that when you can't advertise anything free, give away anything free, provide free product, let people try it? There's lots of obstacles to these kind of things, and you have to document everything you do and keep those records for 7 years and have anybody on premises at any time that is capable and trained and informed enough to provide any given record they may request immediately upon request. And if you cannot do that, theoretically, they could charge you $30,000, for anything they ask for. It's odd because there's these vast the agencies have given themselves such vast leeway where there's the regulations and everything they say in them, and then they always have this caveat line that's like, and anything else we might ask you for. That you have to be able to give us that too. So obviously we're still at a time where track and trace isn't fully implemented. We're not seeing the levying of penalties and fines so much yet. So we haven't really experienced kind of the enforcement muscle or what that could look like. But the concept, I always just think of it as the historical, seismic paradigm shift, especially for legacy operators who are moving from an industry where you never wrote anything down to an industry where literally everything you do is being directly reported to the government. It's a big leap. And it really impacts internal processes and internal operations in terms of helping your cultivation staff that might have been growing a certain way for the last 10 years to be like, oh, by the way, we have all these record-keeping checkpoints now that you have to make sure that you weigh it at this time and enter it and that it's accurate because you can't fix it. And if you do, it's going to raise a red flag. And if it's wrong, we could lose our license. And that skill is such an important thing that is going to have to be built into the companies in terms of, I know companies in Colorado or other states that have been used to dealing with track and trace, a lot of times you have multiple dedicated employees that all they do is keep your system synced to the state track and trace system. And it's a clunky system. It was invented for blueberries. It was never supposed to do this. It's rough. It's government software, yay. It's going to be tough. And it requires a lot of accuracy, a lot of support, and a lot of practice. So it's something I've been encouraging businesses to really do now, is if you are not pretending like you're on track and trace, because all of those record keeping requirements that kick in for track and trace are active now. They just have to be done on paper at a minimum now. So I call it, for the industry, it's the new smash and grab. If any agency decided to do a record keeping audit of any company, I would imagine there would be minimum hundreds of thousands of dollars of possible fines.
Did you have anything that you'd like to?
Yeah, one of the other challenges of track and trace, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't even get training until you have your permanent license. And this is a little ridiculous because the idea is when you get that permanent license, you have 30 days to activate that. So to be able to actually know what you're getting into would be really helpful. But right now, that's not available. I think the system might work really well for blueberries, but I don't think it works really well for what we do, because another problem we face as manufacturers is, cannabis is only one of our ingredients. If you take that one out, we're a manufacturing company, and we need software that supports not just cannabis, but all the other ingredients that go into one of our assemblies. So, you're forced to now work with Metric, and then you want to find a third-party software that works, that actually will, talk to Metric through the API, and then the problem is those are the companies that have the word canna in them. So now you're paying 5 times as much for software that in the real manufacturing world would cost a fraction of that. So there's a lot of these challenges and added expenses that come with just that one word metric. And unfortunately, if that was a turnkey solution to a manufacturing industry or the entire cannabis industry, it would actually make sense. But the way it is now, it doesn't make much sense.
I do also say though that I love the idea. I love the idea of track and trace. I love as we're going to have more visibility on the absolute life cycle of products than any other product type ever before. And what I like to encourage the cannabis industry to do is when we implement this for our products, that then we turn around to other industries and go like, hey, guess what, Campbell Soup? I want to know where my tomato came from. Like, I want to know what you're putting in my food. And that same applicable structure could be applied to other industry if we have to endure it, because it proves that it can be done and you can know every single turn of the wheel, as to say. But I also think that with the implementation of track and trace and with the visibility that it will give the regulators on the industry, the data it will provide for them, and the fact that it will become an antidote to fear. Because right now there's a lot of the regulations are regulating out of hysteria, prejudice, and fear. And it's all about, oh my God, where's the money and the diversion, and they're going to do this, and what are they going to do? And once they kind of get more visibility on the fact of most of us are just doing our job, we're just trudging it out, it's fine. I think you can then have more data and more discussions about possibly starting to like ratchet down some of the, I don't know, over-regulation of the industry.
Let's pivot to taxes again. James, I would ask you, when, let's say a client were to come in, and every client or anybody with a license could have to have a facility. And when you think about the facility and you do your corporate formation, and then you have to deal with the fact that you're dealing with 280E, which doesn't allow you to deduct selling, general, and administrative costs, what would you advise to clients possibly in how to build out their infrastructure within their facility in order to create the greatest amount of return and so forth?
Well, first of all, we generally advise our clients, and don't win most of the time, that they should operate in the form of corporation rather than an LLC, because when they get in trouble with the IRS, the tax liability falls on them personally, whereas if you're in a corporation, it doesn't. So these disputes about 280E, we have lots of clients who might lose their houses, but if they operated in corporate form, they would be way, way better off. So that's the first thing we tell them. The second thing with respect to 280E is that I don't think we accept the interpretation of the IRS of the field agents in many cases. It is true that the cannabis industry has compiled a spectacularly terrible record in the tax court. Many of our clients are preparing to go to other venues like claims court or district court, where we hope to get a more favorable and rational interpretation of 280E. The other thing we tell all of our clients is like all of you are saying, you have to keep really meticulous books and records. Lots of times the IRS will just say, listen, your books and records aren't good enough, so we don't accept whatever it is you're saying.
How about social equity? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
I will say that, let's just admit, I am one of the people who voted for Prop 64, a deeply imperfect measure for the social justice component, because as an ethical human being, I felt that it was deeply inappropriate for some people to be creating a business out of cannabis while other people were still in jail for things that would be legal today. So while, I think it's such a huge, amazing part of the cannabis industry, how we got here, and this moment in the collision of history and business and cannabis and justice that this is even a conversation coming up at events like this is great. That you cannot, especially in California right now, kind of proceed along the road of cannabis without engaging in the conversation of social equity, of social justice, of diversity. And it ties into everything else we're talking about. Because like I said in the beginning, part of the reason why I'm in cannabis is because the middle class collapsed. And along with the collapse of the middle class came the creative class. And 20 years ago, I could live in New York City and have an apartment and work part-time in a bookstore and be an artist. And that reality has been decimated from the face of the earth. that is no longer an option. So when I look at the cannabis industry, and when I look at the ills of the country and the pain that everyone is in, economic pain, opioid addicted pain, all this pain, and you go, well, what can I do to help? What can I do to cause less harm? I see part of my mission and my mandate is about the resuscitation of a viable middle class, of those middle class working jobs. I know that there's a lot of people that are like, I want to start a cannabis company, I want to make $1 billion. I'm not looking at the person making the $1 billion. I'm looking at the warehousing jobs, the agricultural jobs, the transportation jobs, the decently paying, technical training, skilled middle jobs. Like those are the ones. Like you don't need 17 PhDs in your company. You need one PhD that formulated it maybe, and then a bunch of lab techs that could be coming from your community college technical training institute that's now been turned into a cannabis training institute. Like those are the things that get me excited about the possibility of this industry. To not just become another corporate stream in the corporate stream of corporations of the Corporation of America, but to actually bring its fundamental values of the cannabis industry of like sharing, pass the joint. There's enough for everybody. We can do this together. Like, you know what I mean? Like to bring those values into the actual industry and not just leave them by the wayside while everybody's excited about selling CBD on the internet, you know?
Yeah. Anybody on this panel like to talk about labs? Because one of the things we're experiencing now is dealing with labs and getting that product back and through that process through a distributor. So from cultivation to the distributor to the lab and back to the distributor and to the retailer and to the consumer is a big challenge, obviously, to deal with that many hands touching and the cost associated with that. Who would like to maybe speak about that?
I can speak to that.
Okay.
So I'm the chairman of the manufacturing committee for the California Cannabis Industry Association, and this is my second year in that position. I'm also on the board with Julie here. And I can tell you that, you know, when we started talking to the labs last year, trying to work through the proposed regulations, I would say it was a little intense. You know, I think we looked at them as our adversaries. And as you know, truth be told, there's a supply chain here. And if any link in that chain bears too much of the burden, the chain will break and we will all fail. And I would like to say that, you know, working directly with our quality control committee, who are the labs, we were able to really come to consensus as to what made sense, because we all want to succeed at this. And we all want to ensure the public is safe, and we want to ensure the products on the shelf are properly tested and adequately tested. But, you know, the regulations are such that they're overbearing, overburdensome, and unlike pretty much any other industry that you're dealing with. I mean, if you guys don't know, like the poison strawberry story, I mean, you can make an edible. The cannabis can pass phase 3 testing. You put it in that brownie, and because of the other ingredients and the fact that agricultural pesticide standards aren't the same as those associated with cannabis, that product now fails. So that's one of those challenges we have to work through. Working with the labs directly, you have to build a relationship. They have to understand your product. I mean, it's not a one thing fits all in terms of testing protocol. I mean, you have unique matrices, like our drinks that we make, they're unique. We needed to get a validated testing method specific for them. And until you get that, you can't really depend on the results. And if you can't depend on the results, batches fail. And depending on what they fail for, they can't even be remediated. So now you're destroying batches. And for a smaller company, if that happens to you 1 or 2 times, you might be out of business. So working together with the labs, I think we've come to a common ground. And I think this year, through working with the legislature, we'll be able to sort of work out some of the problems. I think there's support for that. Getting a product to consumer that used to pay $30 for it and now pays $70 for it because of all these requirements, that consumer is walking out of the dispensary and going right back behind the 7-Eleven where they used to buy it. So until that testing protocol is something that we can all bear the burden of from a cost perspective, it's going to be a detriment to the industry and to the safety of Californians.
Well, the black market, as we all know, is still alive and heavy right now. I don't know what your experience has been in terms of hearing how many closures there have been recently. We know in our general area of Southern California that we see pockets of cities where enforcement has come in and closed down dispensaries at a fairly significant level, but then they reopen somewhere else very quickly. So we've had big challenges there. And part of the model of being in this business is being able to know that you have sustainability through enforcement where you as a legal business can operate and do it profitably and not having someone in your parking lot selling product at a dispensary undercutting you. And so I kind of throw this at you, James. I know that there's been recent legislation. You're familiar with the reducing the excise tax number. And maybe you could share your perspective on that.
Well, I don't know if that's going to make much of a difference, right? I mean, because the regulatory and tax burden on these businesses is so big, that strikes me as just an incremental change. I don't see what difference it will make. I'd say one other thing. I'm from a really different world from most of you, and when I was doing tax stuff at Goldman Sachs, I called on Altria. Their treasury department is in Park Avenue South, and I don't think some of you understand what's going to come. I would say that Greenspoon Martyr is a national law firm, and many of our clients, their strategy is their exit is to get bought by some big company, and I think that's kind of the exit that makes sense. Either they get bought or they're going to go out of business. So I see a different world from the world that a lot of people in this room see. That's really all I can say.
What do you think, Julie?
Well, I'm in agreement. I mean, that's when I started this a little while ago, and now the clock is ticking a little bit faster. I had said that the cannabis industry had about 18 months, to secure its footprint, to become a political force never before seen on the face of the earth, to be able to advocate for its interests, or it's going to just get wiped out by the oncoming onslaught. And it's that's a lot of everybody's feeling now is we were saying earlier, sell, scale, or die, where it's like, what are you going to do? Because, I mean, that's part of the things is when you look at it in comparison to anything else. I mean, this is a very difficult conversation in the cannabis industry around federal legalization, where people get very excited and they're like, if it was federally legal, then I could bank and my company would do so much better. And part of it for the smaller operators here is like, no, your company will be gone. If once the shackles are off and the lords of industry have nothing to fear to come and enter this space, which they're already in, just look anywhere else in the country, look anywhere else in the economy and go, how is America treating small businesses? How are you guys doing? You feeling supported? You guys are out there, you're competing against, the Amazons and the Walmarts, and you're doing good. And that's a tremendous problem, and that the cannabis industry has been protected in a certain way by being this this outsider quasi industry, and now we are in it. We are in it for good, and unless we can figure out ways politically to lobby for the interests of maintaining state-based economies, because that's the other thing is if this goes federally legal, guess what? California's just going to ship it all out. We'll just be like, we got you covered, America. You're fine. And that's not really going to do much for the people in these newly adopted, medical states just coming on board who are looking to create jobs and infrastructure and tax revenue in their own state. So it's a really it's really complicated, and I think that's the thing that we see so much with the regulatory landscape is that this one, like the unintended consequences of the regulations, where they're like, oh, we're going to tweak this one thing here, and then it just decimated somebody's business model. And that's what we're seeing in this last, responding to this last wave of regulations when they came down with manufacturers can't put industrial hemp in their products anymore. And that was the way that so many manufacturers were balancing out the contents of their product. And suddenly you need a new option for your entire formulation. They say, oh, guess what? Financial interest holders ownerships. You can't do this white labeling agreement you've been doing previously. There goes a contract manufacturer's entire business plan. You can't market your product as beer anymore. Like, what? Okay, so we're gonna, there's all of these shifts that require such immense support and immense nimbleness of the businesses to figure out how they're even gonna survive.
I last counted, I think there's at least maybe 18 to 20 regulatory agencies that you have to go through in order to comply with your license. And I had an opportunity to go out to a dispensary who had just been audited by the BCC, and they had been running for about almost a year, and they got cited for the following things. One, they didn't know where to dispose their product that was considered past its useful date. They were cited for not having a sign that says that we have a community advocate or a liaison that anybody in the city would be able to go to if they had an issue. They were cited on their packaging, and they didn't even know. They thought that the manufacturer would do the right packaging, the lab would make sure it was right, but it was wrong. They had individuals there who had been bud tenders, had been in this industry doing things where they had their passion and their beliefs of doing cannabis services and patient care, spending 8 hours a day just doing compliance, and they were blown away and they didn't know what to do. I don't know what's been your experience, but it seems to me that challenge is real and expensive as we try to navigate how this is going to be affordable product on the shelves, other than the flour and the commodity compression possibly. But as of right now, California is almost its own entire country, and it's very expensive, and people are complaining a lot about buying product legally. What do you think?
Yeah, well, the compliance issue is a big one, and I know that's one of the topics of this panel today. And I can tell you one of the bigger problems, as you brought up dispensaries and these reviews, is dispensaries sort of make their own rules too. So not only do you have to be compliant with the state, and you have to take everything completely literally, or else certain dispensaries will deny your product. Like, for example, we think part of the warning that says keep out of reach of children and animals, we think that's an important part of the warning. So our packaging, we kind of broke that out of the paragraph and brought more attention to it. Well, the business and professional code says it all has to be in the same font and in the same paragraph and in a very specific order. So there are several dispensaries that, refused our product because of that. Granted, in hindsight, I suppose we took liberties, but, the idea is like, here's the message we're trying to convey. Here's the safety message we're trying to tell people, and at the same time, we're getting, our products will not be allowed on the shelf for that. Another example, just 2 days ago, we had a product, the label claim said one thing, it was a THC CBD tincture. The CBD was 12% over the label claim. So what we did was we used our remediation process, we relabeled the products, we did everything we were supposed to do that the state has approved. We took it back to the dispensary, and the dispensary said, oh, we can't take this. We don't take any products with a fail on the COA. Even though we did everything required by the state, the dispensary has decided that's their policy. So we have to deal with not only the state's position, not only the municipality's decisions regarding compliance, but we have to deal with the individual dispensaries. And it even goes beyond that, because depending on who the buyer is that day, who's reviewing the product, you might get another issue. So, that whole thing becomes very burdensome, and the size of your company doesn't matter, because you have to address this almost like one dispensary at a time. There's only so much you can do. You try and get everything right at the state level, and you're still going to have issues.
Thank you. James, you want to close us out? Is there anything you'd like to share?
One good thing I would say is that many of our clients looking to expand their operations in the U.S. are taking advantage of the new capital gains tax regime, the opportunity zone tax regime. So we're working on many projects to help get funding for cannabis projects in places that need more jobs and in rural places. So I do think that's a real bright spot. So let me add that.
Well, I think we're completed. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us. And
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. I told you this wouldn't be boring, and you should be.